Bright, strong, luminous. The performance instructions that mark the top of the score for Lucifer, a duet written for violin and trumpet. Performed by violinist Lucy Russell and myself, Jo Harris, this is perhaps one of the most unusual pieces I have played. The composer, Diana Burrell, wrote Lucifer in 1991 for a performance at the Almeida Theatre. It was played alongside Stravinsky's The Soldier's Tale, another dramatic work from the 20th century that places the violin in the role of the devil. Our performance takes place at Norwich Cathedral, a building that holds special memories for Diana Burrell, whose father was assistant organist at the cathedral when she was growing up. I spoke to the composer about her music over a cup of tea in her garden in Harwich, and I met with the Reverend Dr. Peter Doll, canon librarian at Norwich Cathedral, to discuss the thorny subject of evil in today's world. First, let's hear from Diana on how the piece came about.
Well, I think it was originally commissioned to go with The Soldier's Tale, so a bit of devil in it. They wanted something for some of the instruments that were used in The Soldier's Tale, and because it's a very different approach to the devil, though, from just about every other depiction of the devil in music. I was thinking about Gounod's Faust and Berlioz's Damnation of Faust, because the devil features in those quite a lot, and of course The Soldier's Tale. In all those works, the devil is sort of on land, as it were, almost like a human. He's already lord of the underworld, or the evil one, and he's trying to tempt people. Lucifer is very different. Lucifer is originally one of the angels, had a battle with St. Michael, I think, and it's the moment that he rebels and is chucked out, basically. So that's why you get this incredible brightness at the beginning of my piece, which then becomes darker and darker and lower as he descends to the underworld. So if you like, Lucifer is sort of predates the other depictions of the devil, when he's already in the underworld and uses his influence to, or tries to use his influence to get things from human beings. And I like the word Lucifer, I suppose. It means bright, light, very bright. Lucius is light. And of course that was what he was, an angel. But he rebelled and became evil. The trumpet is so incredibly bright, as the violin can be, but the violin can also make these kind of halos of sound around the trumpet, which is what I thought. So actually they're not two separate characters, they're all about the one person. It's the music that's the devil, really, rather than either of the instruments. I think the most difficult thing about writing the piece was that the climax comes on the very first note, really, when he's in heaven and as bright as can be, and it's all downhill from there. And that fascinated me as well. I thought that's quite a challenge, and it was. And I hope I succeeded with it, but it goes from the climax to a sort of a low arc, really.
The end is so creepy. I was reading your programme notes on the train on the way up. The way that the violin detunes and the trumpet sort of blowing into the instrument. Images did you have in your mind when you were writing that kind of creepy ending?
Just really, really darkness, I think. That's it. It's the end of all hope. It's the underworld. Nobody comes out of there, apparently.
Gosh.
And yes, it is very dark, isn't it? But it was also a musical thing, which it had to be as dark as the beginning was bright. That was sort of the intention. And I love those odd sort of sounds and using instruments in those odd kind of ways.
And on the personality of Lucifer, let's hear from Reverend Dr. Peter Doll at Norwich Cathedral.
Well, Lucifer was one of the angels in heaven, but in the book of the Revelation to John, in chapter 12, it tells the story about how Lucifer and other angels rebelled against God and fought a war against God, and God's angels were led by St. Michael and his angels defeated Satan and his angels, and they were cast down from heaven. So it's an interesting expression of the way in which God gives his creatures free will, and that freedom includes the capacity to rebel against God and to rebel against what can be perceived as the limits that he puts upon us. So that rebellion in heaven, in a sense, is a counterpart to the rebellion on earth that took place in the Garden of Eden. So much of rebellion against God is about our self-deception, as it were, that our being convinced that we can make the world according to our own purposes, and that we can try to refashion the world and assume that we can be in control of it. And it doesn't work that way. And I think that the COVID crisis is a brilliant reminder to us that we fancy ourselves being masters of the universe and totally in control of our environment and so forth, and yet it only takes this one very clever virus, if you can describe it that way, which is bringing life to a standstill as we know it. We're not in charge, much as we like to fool ourselves into thinking so.
Reverend Dr. Peter Doll from Norwich Cathedral. Rehearsing Lucifer with violinist Lucy Russell, we talked about the character of evil, its craftiness, sometimes angry, sometimes beguiling, an adversary that prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Let's hear more about the presence of evil in today's world from Reverend Dr. Peter Doll.
A rejection of the power of evil is fundamental to what it means to be a Christian. People have different experiences of evil. Some, a personification of a figure of evil makes a lot of sense. For others, it's a kind of a power that can have us in its grip, but it's difficult to locate, as it were, in a particular person or a particular place. But if we only look around us in our world, we cannot deny that the power of evil that it has over peoples and nations. Living in a place like Great Britain can feel very, if you're relatively well off, it can feel very safe and protected and normal. And evil is something we think we don't encounter every day because we feel like our lives are fairly well protected. But we're all caught up in structures of evil in ways that we don't always recognize, because we like to think of evil as being something out there. When something horrible happens, when somebody is murdered or a child is abused or something like that, we say, oh, that person is evil. That person is evil. I'm not evil. It has nothing to do with me. But, there are bad people in the world. And therefore we have to we have to lock them up. We have to protect ourselves from them. But it doesn't acknowledge that evil is something that any of us is capable of in the right circumstances. That we're caught up in structures of evil. You think about the climate crisis. Well, I can't put up on my hand and say, I don't make any contribution to climate change. We all do. It's part of the nature of the world that we live in. That we live in societies, we live in communities, and we all participate in behaviours which are destructive of the environment, destructive of other people. We look at the problem of poverty in this country, and we think, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with me because I'm comfortably off and well fed. But we live in a society which, condones that, that is prepared to ignore the fact of so many people living in poverty, and we're not being prepared to do something to address it, to ameliorate their lives. So it's something that we're all caught up in, whether we choose to recognize it or not. I think also, I think that phrase from the baptism service about the deceit and corruption of evil, or as it's put in the Roman Catholic baptism service, the glamour of evil, is something that's very powerful. Because often what seems to be very attractive, things that attract us like power or having control and influence, or all the gadgets that we have that we use to try to control our lives and the lives of those around us, those all seem very fascinating to us. They seem very attractive. They're things that we like to have. But we don't recognize that there's a downside to all these things as well. They might be to our advantage, but they'll be to the disadvantage of others. So that idea of the deceit and corruption of evil, I think, is something that's really important to recognize and to accept as a fact in our everyday lives.
It was perfect in the cathedral, and I was always aware, I suppose, of these vast sort of cavernous spaces, but I hadn't really thought about it until it came to the writing. And of course every building has its own acoustic, doesn't it? Norwich Cathedral sounds very different from the acoustics of other cathedrals. It has its own special sound, but it is the sort of vastness and the fact that everything is so distant and mysterious that I like, and I think cathedrals have that quality. I suppose I was about, 11 when my father moved to the Norwich School, where he was head of music and also became assistant organist at the cathedral. So quite a lot of my childhood wasn't there, and in fact I used to go to my mother's church. But of course the seeds are sown, and I've always been interested. And but I think what I'm grateful for now, funnily enough, is that I was never able to be a cathedral chorister, because they just didn't have girls then. And it wasn't an issue because it just didn't happen. So when one of my brothers became a cathedral chorister, there was no way I thought, if only I could have done that. I just knew it wasn't an option. But I was the musical one in the family, although both my brothers are keen on music. I was the one that sort of went in for it. But I'm very pleased about that now, I think, because I've got all that tradition. And it means I can approach the whole issue from sort of at a bit of a tangent, really.
That's really interesting. One more thing just to mention, just because I think it's lovely and romantic, is you were married at Norwich Cathedral.
We were. My family have quite a history there. My father was a chorister before he went back, and his brother, my uncle, was a chorister. He hated that, I think, actually, but Dad loved it. Dad then went back later on as assistant organist. Richard and I were married there. Both our children were baptised there. Both my parents' funerals were there. So we actually have quite a history of the place, really. Wow. But I did also belong to another church. My mother was a high Anglican, and I had my first organist job at this church, St George's Tombland, opposite the cathedral in Norwich, funnily enough, when I was at school. And so I got quite used to all that too. So I sort of had two places in a way, really. I would play for the morning mass at St George's Tombland, then go to evensong in the cathedral in the afternoon, and then go back for benediction of the Blessed Sacrament at St George in the evening. So I have written quite a lot for the church, and I'm very interested in theology. That's not the same as being a sort of born-again Christian or anything. It's sort of an interest I have. And I've been able to sort of go through the whole thing, but without doing it in the conventional way, because probably if I had been a boy and been a cathedral chorist, I'd have gone down the route of, lay clerk or cathedral organist. And nothing wrong with that, of course. But I'm rather pleased that I was able to be part of all that, but from a slightly different viewpoint, really.
St. Augustine, I think, was the one who said, "He who sings prays twice." It's something that music is often tied in with words, but the music itself is a form of expression and praise to God. God is the giver of all gifts. He's given us many wonderful gifts and abilities, and it's only appropriate that those gifts that he gives us, we have to give back to him as an expression of thanksgiving and praise for all that he's made of us. And so music and all the arts are absolutely central to how we seek to acknowledge God and the gifts he's given us, and to incorporate those gifts into the ways that we offer him thanks and praise.
I give a total freedom to performers. I think that's right. I think it's lovely for everyone brings something very different to it. So I like all that, really.
My performance of Lucifer was created for my pandemic series, The Trumpet Shall Sound. The recording was made possible with generous support from the Ralph Vaughan Williams Trust and an Arts Council for England National Lottery Project grant. The music recording of Diana Burrell's Lucifer was produced by Rosanna Goodall, and Chris Kalkov was the sound engineer. This introduction to the music was created by myself, Jo Harris, and produced by Brough. Thank you for listening.